Backpedaling was
Wild.
not nicest. Siblings' relationship only dying after the divorce, I think is really, really tough.
And if he really thinks that, it makes me wonder, why do you think that? Because we saw leading up to the divorce on the show itself, even outside of just like what my actual siblings felt, but on the show, you saw really hard relationships and strains in relationships and hard.
Well, this is way before the divorce, but
Yeah.
like not going to Isabel's surgery
It was a
totally killed the relationship there. So
Mykelti Brown destroys Kody's lies. The daughter who refuses to let her father rewrite history. There's a moment that every child of a narcissistic parent dreads, the moment when you realize your parent will never actually change, no matter how convincing their performance of growth might seem. For Mykelti Brown, that moment came just a few days ago when she watched her father, Kody Brown, sit in a New York studio and systematically dismantle every ounce of accountability he'd shown on Special Forces. And what she did next? She refused to let him get away with it. This isn't just another Sister Wives drama update. This is about a daughter who watched her father cry on national television, who felt hope for the first time in years that maybe, just maybe, he finally understood what he'd done to his family. This is about that hope being crushed in real time as Kody walked back every word of accountability the moment he felt safe enough to do so. And this is about Mykelti Brown deciding that enough was enough, that she wouldn't sit silently while her father rewrote history to make himself look better. But before we get to Mykelti's devastating response, we need to understand exactly what Kody said that pushed his daughter to publicly call out his lies. Because what happened in those New York interviews wasn't just disappointing, it was a masterclass in how to destroy any chance of reconciliation with your children in record time. Just a few days ago, Kody Brown found himself in New York City doing press for his appearance on Special Forces, World's Toughest Test. For those who don't know, this is the show where Kody had what appeared to be a genuine emotional breakdown, where he sobbed openly about losing his relationships with his children, where he seemed to finally take real accountability for his failures as a father. The images of him crying, voice cracking, admitting he was the problem, had gone viral. Social media was buzzing with cautious optimism that maybe Kody was capable of growth after all. But Kody wasn't in New York to maintain that accountability. He was there to walk it all back. During his interview with the podcast Val Files, Kody began reshaping the narrative in ways that would prove devastating to any hope of reconciliation with his estranged children. And then came his appearance on Fox News, where he really leaned into his revised version of events. The man who had sobbed about being responsible for losing his kids was now telling a completely different story. Kody made two claims during these interviews that would prove to be particularly damaging. First, he stated with absolute confidence that he had great relationships with all of his children before the divorces happened. According to Kody's new narrative, everything was fine, wonderful even, until the marriages fell apart and his children were forced to pick sides. And of course, they picked their mother's sides because of the natural closeness between mothers and children in a polygamous family structure. Let that sink in for a moment. Kody is claiming that all 18 of his children had great relationships with him until external circumstances, the divorces, forced them to choose. It wasn't his behavior that drove them away. It wasn't his favoritism toward Robyn's children. It wasn't his absence during COVID while he stayed exclusively at Robyn's house. It was the divorces. The divorces made his children turn against him. But Kody wasn't done rewriting history. He also addressed his Special Forces breakdown. The moment that had seemed so genuine, so raw, so impossible to fake. And what he said about that moment should concern anyone who thought they'd witnessed real growth. Kody explained that he was under intense pressure during the Special Forces sit-down with the military leaders. He took full accountability in that moment, he admitted. But now that he's had time to reflect, now that he's away from that high-pressure environment, he's revised his assessment. He's not fully responsible for the family's destruction. He wants everyone to know. His ex-wives and children have to be culpable as well. There it is, the complete reversal, the total backtrack. The man who cried on camera about being the problem is now saying, actually, it's not all my fault. They need to take responsibility too. For anyone watching who has experience with narcissistic personality patterns, this is textbook behavior. Take accountability when backed into a corner or when it serves your immediate needs, then walk it back the moment you're in a safer environment where you can control the narrative again. Perform vulnerability when it benefits you, then return to your default setting of blame and deflection once the pressure is off. But what Kody apparently didn't consider was that his children would be watching these interviews, and one daughter in particular was about to make sure the world knew exactly what she thought of her father's lies. Mykelti Brown, Kody's daughter with Christine, has built a following on Patreon by doing detailed rewatches and commentary on Sister Wives episodes. She's known for being thoughtful in her analysis, for providing insider perspective that only someone who lived through these events can offer, and for being relatively measured in her criticism of her father, despite having every reason to be far harsher. When the Special Forces episode aired, showing Kody's emotional breakdown, Mykelti watched it like millions of other viewers. And unlike many of those viewers who were skeptical of Kody's sincerity, Mykelti allowed herself to hope. She reacted to the episode during one of her Patreon sessions, and what she revealed was heartbreaking in its vulnerability. Mykelti watched her father cry about where things stood with his kids. She watched him take accountability for the broken relationships. She watched him talk about wanting to make things right, and she cried. She actually shed tears watching her father's apparent breakthrough. For someone who has been estranged from her father, who has watched him prioritize Robyn's family over her own for years, who has every reason to be hardened against his manipulations, the fact that she cried watching that episode tells you everything about how desperately she still wants her father to be the man he claims he's trying to become. Imagine being in Mykelti's position for a moment. You've spent years watching your father fail you repeatedly. You've watched him choose one household over all others. You've watched him make excuses, deflect blame, play victim. You've protected yourself by maintaining distance, by not getting your hopes up, by accepting that this is who he is. And then you see this moment on Special Forces where he seems genuinely broken by what he's lost, where he finally seems to understand his role in the family's destruction. Against your better judgment, against all your protective instincts, you allow yourself to feel hope. You cry, watching your father's apparent growth, because maybe, just maybe, this time is different. And then, just days later, you watch that same father sit in a New York studio and destroy all of that hope by walking back every word of accountability he'd shown. The betrayal of that experience is difficult to overstate. It's one thing to never show growth in the first place. It's another thing entirely to perform growth so convincingly that you break through your children's protective walls, make them hope, make them cry, and then casually demolish all of that by admitting it was all strategic, all performance, all calculated to get through an uncomfortable situation. But Mykelti Brown wasn't going to let her father get away with this betrayal silently. Not this time. When Mykelti saw Kody's New York interviews, something inside her shifted. The hope she'd felt watching Special Forces curdled into something harder, clearer. She had let herself be vulnerable, had let herself believe her father might finally be capable of genuine accountability. And he'd proven, definitively, that he wasn't. During her Patreon rewatch and commentary session, Mykelti addressed her father's claims directly, and she didn't mince words or try to be diplomatic. She was done protecting him from the consequences of his own lies. When Kody stated in his interviews that he had great relationships with all of his kids before the divorces happened, Mykelti shut that narrative down immediately and decisively. That is not true, she stated flatly. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation, well, maybe from his perspective. Just a direct refutation of her father's claim. But Mykelti didn't just contradict her father. She provided context that makes his lie even more obvious. Even on the show, she pointed out, outside of what they were going through in real life, we all saw those relationships being fractured. Think about what she's saying here. Even in the heavily edited version of events that makes it onto Sister Wives, even with producers crafting narratives and choosing what footage to include, viewers could clearly see that Kody's relationships with his children were falling apart long before any divorces were finalized. If the dysfunction was that obvious, even in the edited for TV version, imagine how much worse it was in real life, in the moments cameras didn't capture or producers didn't include. Mykelti continued, blaming it on the divorces is insane. That word choice is important. Not just wrong or inaccurate, but insane. It's so divorced from reality, so obviously false to anyone who was actually there or who watched the show, that calling it anything less than insane would be underselling how egregious the lie is. But perhaps the most devastating part of Mykelti's response came when she addressed her father's Special Forces breakdown directly. After reflecting on everything that had happened, the emotional episode, the New York interviews, the rapid reversal, Mykelti came to a painful conclusion about what she'd actually witnessed. After much reflection, she wrote, "It's sad to think that he was also only saying the right things when he was pinned down and emotionally broken." Read that again, slowly, and feel the weight of what Mykelti is saying. She's concluding that her father's tears, his accountability, his apparent breakthrough, it was all strategic. He was only saying what he thought would get the pressure off him in that moment. When he was pinned down and emotionally broken, he calculated what words would satisfy his interrogators and make them stop pushing. The tears weren't genuine remorse. The accountability wasn't real growth. It was all performance designed to escape an uncomfortable situation. For a daughter to come to that conclusion about her father, that even his most vulnerable moments are calculated manipulation, represents a level of disillusionment that's genuinely tragic. Mykelti wasn't the only one who had thoughts about Kody's backtracking. Her husband Tony, who has been a supportive presence as Mykelti has navigated her complicated relationship with her father, also weighed in on what they'd witnessed, and his perspective offers important insight into why Kody's behavior is so damaging. Kody backpedaling was not cool, Tony stated plainly. It was not the right thing to do. But Tony didn't just criticize. He offered perspective on why this particular choice was so destructive to any hope of reconciliation. "It's one thing to be accountable and own it," he explained. "But if you want a relationship with your kids, sometimes if you take 100% of the blame, it can actually get you closer to those kids. This is crucial wisdom that Kody apparently cannot grasp." Tony is pointing out that even if the family's dysfunction involved multiple people, even if Kody's ex-wives and children made mistakes along the way, taking full responsibility, genuinely, not strategically, can be the key that unlocks healing. When you're the parent, when you're the one who holds more power in the relationship dynamic, when you're the one your children are desperate to hear take accountability, sometimes taking all the blame is exactly what's needed to start rebuilding. But then Tony delivered the observation that cuts to the heart of why Kody's reversal is so devastating. "But backpedaling will not get you closer. It'll only make things worse." This is what Kody doesn't seem to understand, or perhaps doesn't care about. Every time he takes a step toward accountability and then walks it back, he's not just maintaining the status quo with his children. He's actively making things worse. He's teaching them that his words mean nothing, that his tears are manipulation tools, that any apparent vulnerability is just strategy. He's destroying whatever microscopic amount of trust might still exist by proving repeatedly that he cannot maintain accountability for more than a few days. The tragedy here is that Kody had a real opportunity. Special forces gave him a chance to have a genuine breakthrough, to show his children that he was capable of sustained accountability, to prove that his tears meant something. All he had to do was maintain what he'd said on that show, continue taking responsibility, not walk it back the moment it became uncomfortable or inconvenient. Instead, he did exactly what he always does. He performed growth when it served him, then returned to his default setting of blame and deflection the moment he felt safe to do so. And in doing so, he may have destroyed his last real chance at reconciliation with children like Mykelti, who were actually willing to hope he might change. What makes this situation particularly heartbreaking is understanding what Kody is actually sacrificing with his inability to maintain accountability. Mykelti is one of the children who has been most open to maintaining some kind of relationship with her father. She hasn't completely cut him off. She still talks to him occasionally. She's been willing to give him chances that many of her siblings understandably won't extend. In other words, if Kody had any strategic sense at all, Mykelti is exactly the child he should be focusing his genuine efforts on. She's accessible, she's willing to engage, and she has influence with her siblings. If he could actually repair his relationship with Mykelti, if he could show her sustained, genuine change, she could potentially become a bridge to his other children. She could be living proof that reconciliation is possible, that Kody really is capable of growth. But instead of nurturing that opportunity, instead of protecting the fragile connection that still exists, Kody chose to go on television and destroy Mykelti's hope. He made her cry, watching his special forces break through, then made those tears meaningless by admitting days later that his accountability was all performance. Think about what this means for Mykelti going forward. She allowed herself to be vulnerable, to hope, to believe her father might finally be the person she needs him to be. And he burned her for it. She cried watching him take accountability, and now she knows those tears were wasted on a performance that her father never meant. How do you come back from that? How do you ever trust your father's words again after watching him demolish his own credibility so thoroughly? the next time Kody cries about missing his children, the next time he claims to be taking accountability, the next time he performs vulnerability, Mykelti will remember this moment. She'll remember that her father is willing and able to fake even his most emotional breakdowns if it serves his purposes. And here's the really devastating part. Mykelti isn't just some random viewer analyzing Kody's behavior from afar. She's his daughter. She knows him in ways that strangers never will. She has decades of experience with his patterns, his manipulations, his excuses. When she concludes that his Special Forces breakdown was strategic performance rather than genuine growth, that assessment carries weight that no amount of spin from Kody can overcome. Her siblings are watching this too. They're seeing Mykelti, who was willing to give their father chances, who cried watching his apparent breakthrough, come to the conclusion that it was all fake. They're seeing Tony, an outsider who married into this family, observe that Kody's backtracking destroys any possibility of reconciliation. These aren't bitter ex-wives making accusations. This is Kody's own daughter, supported by her husband, calling out her father's lies based on direct evidence from his own mouth. What's particularly infuriating about Kody's behavior is the delusion required to believe his revised narrative would work. He genuinely seems to think he can claim that all of his children had great relationships with him until the divorces forced them to choose sides, despite years of documented evidence to the contrary. Sister Wives viewers have watched the relationships fracture in real time. We saw Gabriel break down crying about his father abandoning him during COVID. We watched Garrison express feelings of complete rejection. We witnessed the tension between Kody and Christine's children as he failed to show up for them repeatedly. We saw Janelle's kids try to maintain relationships while watching their father prioritize Robyn's household above all others. The fracturing didn't happen because of divorces. The fracturing happened because of Kody's choices, Kody's favoritism, Kody's absence, Kody's failures. The divorces were a consequence of the family's dysfunction, not the cause of it, and certainly not the cause of Kody's broken relationships with his children. Mykelti is absolutely right when she says blaming everything on the divorces is insane. It's an attempt to rewrite years of documented history, to gaslight not just his children, but millions of viewers who watch the relationships deteriorate season after season. It's Kody trying to absolve himself of responsibility by claiming external circumstances destroyed relationships that were actually destroyed by his own behavior. And the children who lived through this, who experienced their father's neglect firsthand, who have memories that don't match his revised narrative, they're not going to let him get away with it. Mykelti is proof of that. She's standing up and saying, no, that's not what happened. We all saw the relationships falling apart long before any divorces. Stop lying. The question is whether Kody is capable of hearing that message, of accepting that his children know the truth and won't let him rewrite it. Based on everything we've seen, based on his pattern of doubling down rather than listening, based on his apparent inability to maintain accountability for more than a few days, the answer doesn't look promising. Here's something that needs to be said plainly. Kody Brown is hurting his children every single time he does this, every time he takes accountability and then walks it back, every time he performs growth and then admits it was strategy, every time he rewrites history to make himself look better. He's inflicting fresh wounds on kids who are already scarred from years of his neglect and favoritism. Mykelti and her siblings see him on television. They watch Sister Wives. They watch Special Forces. They see the interviews he does with podcasts and news shows. And just because they're not all reacting publicly the way Mykelti has doesn't mean they're not seeing it, not processing it, not being hurt by it. Imagine being one of Kody's children and watching your father cry on Special Forces about losing you. Imagine the complicated feelings that would bring up. Anger at being manipulated, hope that maybe he finally gets it, grief over what the relationship could have been. Then imagine watching that same father go on television days later and walk back everything he said. The whiplash of emotions, the confirmation that your father is exactly who you feared he was, the destruction of any fragile hope you might have allowed yourself to feel. That's trauma. That's ongoing emotional damage. That's a father choosing his ego over his children's well-being, choosing his need to be right over their need, for a parent who can genuinely acknowledge the harm he's caused. And Kody keeps doing it. He keeps hurting them, keeps disappointing them, keeps proving that his words mean nothing. The Special Forces reversal is just the latest in a long pattern of taking one step toward accountability and then 10 steps back into deflection and blame. Mykelti calling out her father's lies isn't just about setting the record straight, though that's certainly part of it. It's also about refusing to let him continue hurting her and her siblings without consequence. It's about saying, no, you don't get to perform growth on TV and then demolish it in interviews without us calling you out. You don't get to rewrite our history to make yourself feel better. You don't get to lie about what actually happened without us telling the truth. That takes courage, especially when you're talking about your own parent. It would be easier to stay silent, to let him say whatever he wants, to avoid the inevitable backlash and family drama that comes with publicly calling out a parent. But Mykelti chose truth over comfort. She chose protecting the accurate narrative over protecting her father's feelings. And in doing so, she's likely protecting her siblings too. Because when one person stands up and says, "This is a lie," it gives others permission to acknowledge the truth they've been living with. So where does this leave Mykelti's relationship with her father? That's the question that hangs over everything. Before this interview debacle, Mykelti was one of the children who seemed most open to maintaining some kind of relationship with Kody. She talked to him occasionally. She gave him chances. She was willing to believe in the possibility of change. But after watching her father walk back his accountability so thoroughly, after allowing herself to hope and having that hope crushed, after crying over his apparent breakthrough, only to discover it was all performance, how does she come back from that? How does she trust anything her father says going forward? The honest answer is that she probably can't, at least not for a very long time. Trust, once broken this thoroughly, takes years of consistent, sustained change behavior to rebuild. And Kody has shown absolutely no capacity for that kind of sustained growth. He can perform accountability for a day, maybe a week, but maintaining it indefinitely, actually changing his behavior rather than just his words, that seems beyond his current capabilities. Tony's observation about backpedaling making things worse rather than better is particularly relevant here. Before the Special Forces interviews, Mykelti had low expectations of her father, but maintained some willingness to engage. Now, after watching him destroy his own credibility so spectacularly, her expectations have probably dropped even further, and her willingness to be vulnerable with him has likely evaporated entirely. In trying to save face publicly, in trying to avoid taking full responsibility for the family's destruction, Kody has sacrificed whatever fragile relationship he still had with one of the few children who was still giving him chances. He's proven to Mykelti that her hope was misplaced, that her tears watching Special Forces were wasted on a performance that meant nothing. And the tragedy is that this was entirely preventable. All Kody had to do was stand by what he said on Special Forces. All he had to do was maintain the accountability he'd shown, resist the urge to deflect blame, accept that being the villain in his children's stories might be the price of eventually becoming the father in their lives again. But he couldn't do it. He lasted maybe a week before the discomfort of accountability became too much, and he had to start distributing blame, rewriting history, making himself the victim again, and in doing so, he's likely lost Mykelti's trust permanently. Let's talk about what Kody's behavior reveals about his priorities, because his actions speak far louder than his words ever could. When Kody chose to walk back his Special Forces accountability in those New York interviews, he was making a choice about what matters more to him, his ego or his children. Maintaining accountability would have cost him something. It would have meant sitting with the discomfort of being seen as the villain, the bad father, the one who destroyed his family. It would have required accepting that assessment without defending himself, without distributing blame, without rewriting history to make himself look better. That discomfort would have been the price of potentially rebuilding relationships with his children. But Kody decided that price was too high. He decided that protecting his ego, maintaining his narrative of being a victim rather than a perpetrator, was more important than whatever fragile hope his children might have had after watching Special Forces. He chose feeling better about himself over giving his children what they needed to even consider reconciliation. And here's what makes that choice so damning. Kody has lost most of his children already. They're already estranged, already keeping their distance, already living their lives without him. He has almost nothing left to lose with them. The only thing his continued defensiveness and blame-shifting accomplishes is ensuring that the estrangement becomes permanent, that whatever microscopic possibility existed for reconciliation gets destroyed completely. What did Kody gain by walking back his accountability? A few interview moments where he got to deflect blame? The temporary comfort of not having to sit with full responsibility? Those are such small, meaningless victories compared to what he's sacrificing. The possibility of relationships with his children, the chance to be part of their lives, the opportunity to meet future grandchildren and be involved in family milestones. But Kody can't seem to see beyond his immediate need to protect his ego. He can't make the calculation that taking full blame, even if it feels unfair or uncomfortable, might be worth it if it means eventually having relationships with his kids. He's so focused on not being the villain in the story that he can't see he's guaranteeing he'll always be the villain by refusing to accept responsibility. Mykelti is watching all of this. Her siblings are watching all of this. And they're learning, definitively, that their father values his ego more than he values them. That's the real message of Kody's backtracking, whether he intends it or not. The response to Mykelti's call out of her father has been overwhelmingly supportive across social media platforms and Sister Wives fan communities. People who have been watching this family for years, who have witnessed Kody's patterns of behavior, who saw through his Special Forces performance even before he admitted it was strategy, they're all rallying behind Mykelti for speaking truth. But more importantly than general public support, Mykelti's siblings are undoubtedly seeing her courage in calling out their father's lies, and that matters enormously. When one person in a family system stands up and says, "This is what really happened, and I won't let you rewrite it," it gives everyone else permission to trust their own experiences and memories. How many of Kody's other children watched that Special Forces episode and had complicated feelings about their father's tears? How many of them allowed themselves a moment of hope that maybe he was finally getting it? How many of them then watched the New York interviews and felt that same crushing disappointment that Mykelti experienced? Mykelti speaking out validates all of those siblings' experiences. It tells them they're not crazy for feeling betrayed by their father's rapid reversal. It confirms that their assessment of his behavior as calculated rather than genuine is accurate. It gives them evidence they can point to when people ask why they're estranged from their father, because here's his own daughter explaining exactly why his words can't be trusted. This is particularly important for the younger children who are still navigating their relationships with Kody, who might feel pressure to give him chances, who might doubt their own perceptions when their father performs growth on television. Mykelti's statement serves as a warning and a validation. Trust your instincts, believe your experiences. Don't let his performances of accountability fool you into thinking he's actually changed. And for viewers of Sister Wives who have been watching this family for over a decade, Mykelti's statement confirms what many have suspected all along. Kody's tears are strategic. His vulnerability is performance. His accountability is temporary at best and completely fake at worst. The man they see on television claiming to want relationships with his children while blaming everyone but himself for those relationships being broken. That's the real Kody, not the crying man on Special Forces who seemed to finally take responsibility. So what comes next for the Brown family? Where does this leave Kody in his increasingly desperate quest to somehow not be seen as the villain in his family's implosion? And what does it mean for his children who are watching their father repeatedly choose his ego over any possibility of reconciliation? The pattern is now undeniable and well documented. Kody will perform accountability when backed into a corner or when it serves his immediate purposes. He'll cry, he'll take responsibility, he'll say all the right words. But within days, sometimes within hours, he'll walk it all back, distribute blame, rewrite history, and return to his default position of being the victim of circumstances beyond his control. His children are learning they cannot trust his words, no matter how genuine they seem in the moment. Mykelti learned that lesson painfully when she allowed herself to cry watching his Special Forces breakdown, only to discover days later that it was all strategic performance. Other siblings are learning it by watching Kody's pattern repeat over and over. Accountability followed by backtracking, vulnerability followed by blame shifting, promises followed by broken trust. And with each repetition of this pattern, reconciliation becomes less possible. Not because his children are unwilling to forgive, not because they're holding grudges or being influenced by bitter mothers, but because Kody is actively destroying whatever microscopic amount of trust might still exist. He's teaching them that his tears mean nothing, that his apologies are temporary, that his accountability lasts only as long as he's uncomfortable. The tragedy is that Kody still seems to believe he can have it both ways. He can perform growth to get praise and positive attention, then walk it back to avoid the discomfort of actual accountability. He can blame his ex-wives and the divorces publicly while somehow expecting his children not to see it or be hurt by it. He can lie about the state of his relationships with his kids and not expect those same kids to call him out on those lies. But Mykelti has proven that strategy won't work. She's shown that his children are watching, that they remember what actually happened, that they won't let him rewrite history without pushback. She's demonstrated that the pain he causes with his backtracking is real and significant enough to make her break her usual patterns and publicly call out his lies. And if Mykelti, one of the children most willing to give Kody chances, has reached the point where she's publicly stating her father was only saying the right things when pinned down and emotionally broken, where she's shutting down his false narratives about their relationships being fine until the divorces, where she's done hoping he'll actually change, where does that leave Kody's chances with his other, even more estranged children? The answer seems pretty clear. Nowhere good. Kody has shown his children exactly who he is. Someone more committed to protecting his ego than to being their father, and they're responding accordingly by protecting themselves from further disappointment and pain. Here's what Kody needs to understand, though he almost certainly never will. Taking full accountability, even when it feels unfair, even when others share blame, even when it means being seen as the villain, that's not weakness. That's not surrender. That's actually the only possible path to the reconciliation he claims to want. His children don't need him to be perfect. They don't need him to have been a flawless father. They don't need him to rewrite history so he looks better. What they need is for him to acknowledge the harm he caused, to take responsibility without deflection, to show sustained, genuine change over time, rather than performing accountability for a few days before walking it back. Mykelti's tears watching Special Forces tell you everything you need to know about how desperately these kids still want their father to be the person he claims he's trying to become. The fact that she cried, that she let herself be that vulnerable, that she allowed herself to hope despite years of disappointment, shows that the possibility of reconciliation still existed, at least with her. But Kody's backtracking, his blame shifting, his claim that everyone else needs to take responsibility too, that's what destroys those possibilities. Not because his children are unwilling to forgive, but because they can't rebuild trust with someone who won't consistently take responsibility for breaking it in the first place. Tony was absolutely right when he said that taking 100% of the blame can actually get you closer to your kids, even if that blame isn't entirely fair. Because at a certain point, being right becomes far less important than being in relationship. And Kody's insistence on being right, on distributing blame, on rewriting history, that's what's keeping him estranged from most of his children. Mykelti has now joined the growing list of Kody's children who have publicly contradicted his narratives, who have called out his lies, who have refused to let him rewrite their family history. And every time one of his children does that, every time they choose truth over protecting their father's feelings, Kody's chances of reconciliation diminish further. The question now is whether Kody is capable of learning from this, whether watching his daughter publicly state that his Special Forces breakdown was just strategic performance will finally break through his defenses, whether losing Mykelti's trust, one of the few children who was still willing to give him chances, will be the wake-up call he needs. Based on everything we've seen over years of sister wives, based on his consistent patterns of behavior, based on his apparent inability to maintain accountability for more than a few days, the outlook isn't promising. But perhaps, just perhaps, having his lies exposed so thoroughly by his own daughter will finally force him to confront reality in a way nothing else has. What do you think, Soul Sister Wives family? Has Kody destroyed his last real chance at reconciliation with Mykelti by walking back his Special Forces accountability? Do you believe any of his children will ever be able to trust his words again after watching this pattern repeat so many times? And what will it take, if anything, for Kody to finally understand that protecting his ego is costing him his relationships with his children? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your take on Mykelti's response and whether you think Kody is even capable of the sustained change that reconciliation would require. And if you're not already subscribed to Soul Sister Wives, hit that subscribe button now, because this Brown family drama is far from over. We'll be here covering every development, every revelation, every moment as this story continues to unfold. Don't forget to hit that like button if you appreciate Mykelti's courage in speaking truth, and share this video with anyone who needs to understand why Kody's children are estranged. It's not because of divorces or taking sides, it's because of his own behavior and his inability to take genuine, sustained accountability for it. Thanks for watching Soul Sister Wives, and I'll see you in the next one, where we'll continue following this family's journey and holding Kody accountable for the narrative he's trying to spin. Stay strong, stay informed, and remember, the truth always comes out eventually, especially when brave people like Mykelti refuse to let lies stand unchallenged.